Well, we're rattling very quickly to the Christmas and New Year period, and I want to look at look back, what was said, how we've progressed through the month, and the big test is coming up, I think anyway, from New Year onwards. Thanks for clicking on to the Wednesday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. Let's look back at the first 20 days of December. So we've only got 10, 11 days left of the month. And this is how the global temperature anomaly is looking. We've got a very large area of colder than average, which really stands out actually, and it really does go against what we've seen so far really this year. But anywhere from the northern UK, we're starting to shrink that. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail in just a second. But all the way across from Scandinavia, right the way across, the majority of Russia is colder than average. Kazakhstan, Mongolia, the northern reaches of China, where we've seen temperatures close to -50 in recent days, astonishing cold here. But look at how much warmth we've got, not only within the Arctic, but over North America, large swathes of Brazil. And if we look specifically at Europe, you can see how the cold is shrinking dramatically from that very cold start at the beginning of the month. This was expected, folks. This was part of the December forecast here on markvoganweather.com that we would see this turnaround taking place. Now, if we look at the MJO, and I know this is something that I've been harping on about, folks are probably a wee bit tired of listening about the MJO, but it has correlated almost perfectly. And I want to show you where it's going back to, because this is very, very important as we go into the new year here. And we know what's going on within the stratosphere, and if we've got time, we will have a look at that. But you can see where we started off, and the more amplified the MJO is in a particular phase, the more of an influence it has on the mid to high latitude pattern. And you notice here that as we moved through the middle to second half of November, it was very amplified. It went through phase 8 into phases 1. And around this time frame, that was just as the cold was starting to develop late month into the early portion of December. Then, in its very firmly amplified state, it rotated through phases 1 into 2, and even back then, we could see that the MJO was going into phases 3, 4, and 5, and that was why I thought that this month, as cold as it started off, it wasn't as cold as what we seen last December, may I add, but nonetheless, it was a cold start, and I knew that we were going into the warm phases. So therefore, the highly anomalous start to the month of December, I knew was going to get chipped away as we progressed through the month. Now, I did make the statement that it would take a firm warm-up to bring the temperature back close to average. I was slightly worried a wee bit, because I've got a average to slightly above average December overall, and I think you will maybe admit yourself that the idea that I did have at the end of November has played out quite well. So winter, month number 1 of winter, I think anyway, has played out quite well indeed. Now there is question marks over Christmas and New Year, and we'll get to that in just a second. But we progressed through those warm phases of 4 into 5. That allowed the temperatures to really rise. The pattern done what the MJO suggested it should do. And now where we're going is we're maybe perhaps skipping phases 8, but we're going into phases 1. And what's striking in the last few days is it's becoming more amplified in phase 1. So by the time we reach Boxing Day, you can see here that we're almost back out to the outer line that started off the 18th, the 19th of November. The point I'm trying to make here is that the big test is going to come towards the New Year period and through the first 10 days of January. Do we essentially go back towards what we've seen in the beginning of December? That is going to be the big question. And remember what I said in the winter forecast, that the overall month of December starts off cold, it warms up, it then turns colder potentially, but it depended on what the MJO was doing. it would turn colder Christmas to New Year period, and we're kind of flirting with that. But it looks as if there is a good deal of resistance actually showing up, and that was always going to be the uncertainty. But the question is, do we see this amplification back towards almost most amplification as what we've seen back around the middle to second half of November? And if so, what influence will that have on the upper air pattern? Remember what happened? The Arctic oscillation tanked into negative territory. You can see here with that rotation into phase 4 and 5, we then went back firmly positive. Now we're back to neutral. But notice here that in the very end of this run, the ensemble mean, the dashed black line, is trying to take it negative here. So a little bit less than neutral in the negative territory. The North Atlantic oscillation was seeing the same thing, positive. Then it tanked into negative territory. Then it's seen the response to the MJO phase 4 and 5. Now we're trending back towards neutral. Now, a neutral situation doesn't necessarily coincide with guaranteed cold conditions, but nonetheless, it will be interesting to see what happens. But certainly, it's interesting to see how the MJO has been, in a sense, responding to the pattern. Now, we are seeing the weakening of Nino region 1.2. We're continuing to see the leveling off of 3.4, but I even think this area is starting to weaken. That Nino region just off the west coast of South America seems to be the warmest at the moment here, but the models do have the convection focused over the Central Pacific, and that is a favourable phase for high latitude blocking and colder conditions, both for North America and indeed for Europe. So let's take a look at the ECMWF Extended Ensemble. So this is, of course, the run of 51 members merged together to create a blend of the overall trend. Always better to look at an ensemble than an individual operational because it gives you a little bit more to play with. Upcoming 7-day period, you can see here we've got a fairly flat, we've got a kind of west and northwesterly airstream coming into the northern half of the British Isles here, so not overly cold. But watch what happens as we play through this loop. Bear in mind what is taking place within the tropics. And as I have to emphasize the point, the more active the MJO, the more influential it should be within the mid to high latitude pattern. But notice here that as we play through this loop, we're starting to see heights building over the top of Canada in particular. We're starting to see a negative develop from Texas out into the North Atlantic here. We've still got that positive NAO signal here between the 24th and 31st of December here. But watch what happens with the ECMWF weeklies. We're starting to raise heights more over the northern half of North America, extending into Greenland. We're starting to pull that negative towards the UK and Ireland here, which is a very interesting signal as we move out of December and begin the new year here. But this is one model run. The GFS ensemble isn't necessarily in bed with the ECMWF, but nonetheless, you can see that what I'm talking about, this is the overall pattern. What I'm talking about is at least being shown on the models here. It doesn't mean it has to happen, but you can then understand a little bit more as to where I'm coming from. Even if this doesn't materialize, I haven't been dependent on just one individual model run. That's why I've not showed you. I have showed you and I haven't showed you the Christmas scenario because they're so back and forth. They're so unpredictable. It looks as if the models are now coming into agreement that we're flattening the pattern over the Atlantic. We're going to have a milder westerly flow into the UK and Ireland here. So snow chances diminish significantly, mainly across England and Wales and Ireland, possibly Northern Ireland as well. High ground of Scotland, high ground of Northern England has the greatest chance of seeing snow around the period between Christmas Eve and Boxing Day, I'm afraid. So snow chances are very minimal, as is often the case here in the UK and Ireland. But this is certainly a very, very interesting situation developing here with blocking over the North Atlantic. So we're shutting down the westerlies. There's your negative QBO signal combined with an El Nino, combined with a rapidly fading IOD. This may be the indications that we're starting to see the pattern going to where I think it's going to go. Always my nagging concern was that we would see the east-based El Nino become more dominant as we moved into the middle and second half of the winter season. But overall, I'm quite happy with the month of December so far. Cold start, warm middle, and then there was the big question mark, depending on what the MJO was doing towards the Christmas and New Year period. And you can see where we're flirting with it. Maybe not quite as cold as I thought it might have been between Christmas and New Year, but we're still a wee while away yet. Things can slightly change, but I like what I'm seeing with regards to the longer term models, at least anyway, as we move into the month of December. And remember what the January forecast is, by the way, that we have got a potential cold start, cold first 10 days or so of the month. Then we'll see a pullback. And the reason why I'm quite optimistic about the way things are playing out is the MJO might sneak back into the warmer phases of 3, 4, and 5 mid to late January, but we need to then take into consideration what's happening within the stratosphere, and that's a whole different ballgame altogether, because the MJO might be doing one thing, the stratosphere doing another, and then what wins out, the MJO warm phase or the stratosphere, possible sudden stratospheric warming. There is still a lot of things to happen yet within the stratosphere. I'm not entirely convinced that it's happening yet, but I'm watching this period early to mid-January, possibility of some major warming, whether it be a split, whether it be a complete collapse, or whether it be a displacement. Then the question is, does the stratosphere couple with the troposphere? Do we see the response? If we do see the response, does the cold set up exactly where we want to see it, or does the region, the block and high, like 2012, set up a little bit too close to the UK, where the cold was bitterly cold over the Netherlands, over Belgium, over France, the UK, not so much. So there is a lot of parameters that has to come together just nicely. So let's look at the stratosphere to finish off today's video. So obviously when you're looking further and further out, you have to really take things with a pinch of salt. But this is the overall thinking. This is the crux, basically the foundation to my winter forecast itself. The MJO would be doing some sort of driving of the early winter pattern. Then what may happen is, and this could be a combination of the Indian Ocean Dipole, the El Nino, and the MJO, and even with the MJO rotating into those warm phases, may have been a little bit of a side effect of the Indian Ocean Dipole. Now, we are seeing the rapid demise of that now, and you always have to take that into consideration. Does that have another influence later down the road, like we've seen in 1920? That has to be taken into consideration as well. But what's going on within the stratosphere is most interesting. The exceptional swings in temperature over East Asia, the remarkable warmth over North America at the moment, all that is having an influence from troposphere into the stratosphere. And I think that is what's helping decelerate those mean zonal winds at the 60 degrees north. But this is the 70 millibar level here. So this is almost at the boundary layer between the upper troposphere and lower stratosphere here. And you can see the very strong warming taking place from East Asia across to North America here. This is the initial. And I think what happens with this level then starts to correspond to the 500 millibar level. And you've got that strong warming, you then start to expanding the stratosphere when you warm it. You're then contracting the troposphere, so you're essentially from ground to the top of the troposphere is a lesser depth when you've got a warming of the stratosphere. And that then encourages height rises, the pressure to build. And therefore, this is why I think if it all comes together properly, you will start to see the response taking place at the surface and 500 millibars. So if you look at this situation here, by the time we reach 168 hours at the 70 millibar level, you can see here that we're starting to see that warming progress towards the North Atlantic here. Skip out to 10 days from now, and you can see that at 70 millibars, you've got that warming now starting to show up over the Baffin Straits and over Greenland. Will we see that response? The ECMWF is certainly hinting at that. The MJO may help out as well. Lots of things going on. Keep it right here on my YouTube channel. Like, share, and subscribe. Windy tomorrow, and it's going to be an unsettled run up to Christmas as well. We'll look at Christmas in a little bit more detail again tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening. Bye for now.